Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special Tuesday Facebook Live, broadcasting here from the cupola of Schmucker Hall on top of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. And we've been coming to you each and every Tuesday during this time of quarantine, although your museum is back open, less than quarantine, bringing you stories and interesting interpretations from the areas of war, religion, medicine, and race during this time. And we thought we would take the opportunity today, June 30th, 2020, the 157th anniversary of the eve of battle, of the Battle of Gettysburg, to spend some time talking about what was going on in and around Gettysburg on this day 157 years ago. So we're going to be talking about what civilians in town were thinking during that time, what was going on in the Confederate Army and the Confederate camps west of town, and what was happening in the Union First Corps and Buford's Cavalry Division as they are making their way up to Gettysburg. So if you like this, we invite you to like and to share this content, share it with your friends. We've been posting a lot of videos, and a lot of people have been talking about the great content, so share them with your friends. And Darryl, what do you have to say?
Well, thank you for being with us today. That's a good introduction, and I think that we're going to have a good time this afternoon thinking about what was going on 157 years ago right now, earlier this morning, 157 years ago, and thinking about the activities that are unfolding. So we thank you for sticking with us through all this quarantine stuff, and we're glad that we've been able to provide some interesting conversations for you. We've certainly had a good time doing it. We're going to keep on doing it. It's a great way to stay in touch with all y'all and get these stories out and think about the Civil War in new ways, in interesting ways. And then on the days of, we're on these anniversary days, it's really important to come back to the center and think about what happened between June 30th and July 6th around Gettysburg. As we think about the whole advance, the Confederate advance, the United States Army's advance, the battle itself, and then the days after. So, Pete, you wanted to talk about the civilians and what's going on. I'm going to talk about Johnston Pettigrew's North Carolinians in a few minutes, but let's talk about the folks here in Gettysburg first, and then we'll get to the military side. The meat of the matter. Yeah, and I think it's important to always keep in mind, and me coming to Gettysburg as I was growing up from New Jersey, coming from the north, you tend to forget how close we are to Maryland, how close we are to the Mason-Dixon line, only about 8 miles away from the center of Gettysburg to a southern state. And so this let's put that correctly. A slaveholding
state.
Very important.
And I look at anything below as a northerner, anything below the Mason-Dixon line is a southern state. But it's important to look at that and look at the Mason-Dixon line, the southern border of Pennsylvania, the northern border of Maryland, as a battleground. Because for 80 years, from the time that Pennsylvania passes an act of gradual emancipation in 1780, all the way up through the Gettysburg campaign, this area was an area of strife when it came to the issues of freedom and slavery. So this whole area was always kind of encompassed that battleground. And in late June 1863, it's going to spill over into a major conflict. This is all getting to say that the people of Adams County, the people of Gettysburg, were fearful that the war would come to their community even as early as 1861. And by the time that we get to the Confederate Army coming across the Potomac or across the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania, there are some people that are still very fearful that there's going to be an incursion, but there are also people that don't think that there's going to be an incursion. That all of this is sort of a cry wolf, that people are making a lot of business about nothing. Sally Myers writes in her diary on June 17th, she's a school teacher in town, that I don't know what all this fuss is about. They're never going to make it up here. And then on June 26th, 1863, so 5 days before the Battle of Gettysburg begins, that's when war is first going to come and visit this community, as Jubal Early's Confederate division is going to march through Gettysburg on their way from the Chambersburg area to York, and then finally John Gordon's brigade is going to head out to Wrightsville. So even before this day, even before June 30th, the by the evening of June 30th, the fearfulness that war is going to come has picked up again, and that's because as Michael Jacobs from Gettysburg College is going to say right up here in this cupola, that the tide of war is going to crest here below his very feet, because on the evening of June 30th, about Johnston Pettigrew a moment. What's going on there?
Well, Johnston Pettigrew is a Henry Heath's division of AP Hill's Corps, and he's going to lead troops on the Gettysburg campaign. It's the first campaign that Pettigrew's participated in since the 7 Days campaign where he was wounded and captured. He's going to lead a group of regiments that don't have a tremendous lot of experience. They had been posted largely along the North Carolina coast. They'd been involved in some small-scale combat in 1862 and early 1863. They're transferred to Robert E. Lee's army after the Battle of Chancellorsville and become part of Harry Heath's new division as a part of A.P. Hill's new Army Corps. So you've got brand new troops, you've got brand new brigade and division and corps leaders involved in the very early phases of the advance on Gettysburg on June 30th, and that has a lot to do with how the battle really unfolds.
We might have to move up. Apparently the wind is too loud.
It's too loud. Okay, so go over here. I'll move up this way. I see.
Move up.
Okay.
And you can why don't you focus on Daryl and then I'll step back in.
Yeah, we can do that.
We can do that. Yeah.
We're flexible, and we're also really loud. Is that working a little bit better?
I'll ask you.
That's the National Park Service voice right there. Several years of working in Chicago helped develop that. We good? All right. Well, let's.
No, you keep
Well,
talking.
I'll just keep talking because I can talk all day long. In any case, Johnston Pettigrew's troops are largely green troops, and that's going to come into play both in his performance on June 30th and in the ways that he is understood and taken by his division commander Henry Heath and A.P. Hill, his corps commander, when he reports back. So what happens on the morning of? Well, let's back up about a half a step and think about Pettigrew's troops. A lot of these guys are conscripts. They're men who've come into the army later in the war, and in the early phases of the Gettysburg campaign, there are some serious desertion issues that are going on as men are trying to go home to see their families. These are men from the Piedmont of North Carolina, and there are some serious concerns. There are some soldiers who, as they cross the Pennsylvania state line, are under arrest and condemned to be shot for desertion. And one of the officers in the 47th North Carolina goes back and talks to them and says, "Hey, look, are you in support of the Confederacy? If you are, we'll forgive you if you fight in the next battle." And they join the ranks and fight during the rest of the Gettysburg campaign. But the desertions begin to fall off the farther north they get. There are many men in Pettigrew's brigade who are staunch Confederates, who are men who are ready to, quote, lay waste to the north, just like they have to our south, marching in the ranks of Pettigrew's brigade. So they cross on the 27th of June. They are part of A.P. Hill's turn towards York. The orders to Hill's Corps were to cross the mountains from Chambersburg and the Fayetteville area, come across through Gettysburg and out towards York, basically following John B. Gordon's brigade on the route that he had taken on the 26th and 27th. And the idea was to move towards the railroad connections between Philadelphia and Harrisburg. That changes as the nature of the campaign begins to shift, and Lee finds out that the Army of the Potomac has crossed the Potomac River and is very close to the Gettysburg area. He issues his recall order, but then continues to push forward. Hill's Corps especially continues to push forward, acting under those June 27th orders to head towards York. And Harry Heath's division is the spearhead of that. And on the 29th of June, they are in the Cashtown area. They are camped in the Cashtown area. They're the front of Hill's Corps. The rest of the Corps, Pender's division, is in the Buchanan Valley up on the top of the South Mountain Range, and the other divisions are trailing behind. So as he is in camp on June 30th, one of the things that's remarkable about what's happening in A.P. Hill's Corps is that there's something of a humdrum, everyday Army kind of thing going on. The soldiers of Pettigrew's brigade get paid on June 30th. That's the end of the quarter. The troops in Pender's division up in Buchanan Valley are being issued new clothes. They're being paid. Reports are being written. And there's not a real sense of urgency or a sense that the United States Army is close by. Harry Heath has instructions on the morning of the 30th of June to send a reconnaissance force into Gettysburg to gather some supplies that were rumored to be here, including the now famous shoes. And Pettigrew's brigade is given the task of moving to Gettysburg, seeing what's out in front, and trying to bring back some supplies. The regiments that are tasked with performing this are the 11th, the 47th, and the 26th North Carolina. The 52nd North Carolina had been sent down towards Fairfield, where they engage in a sharp little skirmish where they drive
about
off.
that a little bit.
I know, where they drive off a portion of Buford's brigade that's trying to, or Buford's division that's trying to come up the Carroll Track Road. This kind of tips Buford off to the concentration of Lee's army and where Lee's army really is. It's not a hard guess, but it really confirms some information. But anyway, the idea was at about 6:30 in the morning, Pettigrew's troops were going to march out of their camp. They were going to come down the Chambersburg Road, and they were going to do reconnaissance in Gettysburg, and they were going to take what they could find in the town. So they marched down the road. They get to McKnightstown, and they come across a regiment from John Brockenborough's brigade, the 55th Virginia. And in a conversation between the colonel of the 55th Virginia and Johnston Pettigrew, it was decided that the Virginians would follow along, that they would participate in this reconnaissance, even though they weren't technically under the command of Johnston Pettigrew. They came along because, as the colonel of the 55th North Carolina, or 55th Virginia put it, Pettigrew needed some veteran soldiers with him. He said, "My men are inexperienced, and I need some veterans with me." And so along down the road they come, 4 regiments strong, a little over 2,000 men coming down the road to do a reconnaissance in Gettysburg. About 9:30, they arrive on the western side of Gettysburg, and they go into line of battle and come across, and they stop on Seminary Ridge, right where we're standing right now. One citizen of Gettysburg says the line stretched about 1.25 miles, or 1.5 miles. A lot of troops on the ridge. And the skirmishers, dozens of men, fan out and then move another 300 yards beyond the seminary, down towards the Sheed's house and into what one North Carolinian called the suburbs of Gettysburg. About that time, they look to the south and they see the head of Buford's cavalry corps, or cavalry division, coming up the Emmitsburg Road. And from Seminary Ridge, you could see the round tops very clearly. This is the top of this ridge was very clear all the way down to the round tops, so you could see some distance, and with a good set of binoculars, you'd be able to see very clearly the advance of Buford's troops. Pettigrew sees this, and he turns around and he starts moving back towards Hers Ridge and then back towards Marsh Creek. A squadron of the 8th Illinois, and Pete will talk about this in a little bit more detail in a minute, but a squadron of the 8th Illinois Cavalry follows. A couple of Pettigrew's staff officers watch this advance, and they show themselves from time to time, and the Union cavalry troops would stop. The rolling hills kind of helped them do this observation of the advance. And what happens is that Pettigrew brings his men back to Marsh Creek, really exactly where the battle starts the next morning. He stops. He puts his troops in line, two regiments on either side of the road, somewhat back from Marsh Creek, and then another regiment down closer to the creek. They stay there for till mid-afternoon, early evening. and then two of the regiments, the 3 regiments, the 55th Virginia, the 11th North Carolina, and the 47th North Carolina, marched back to a point somewhere between Seven Stars and Cashtown, or excuse me, Knightstown, and go into bivouac. The 26th North Carolina stays in front of Marsh Creek and perform picket duty overnight. The thing that's important to remember about this day is that it's raining. It rained. There's light rain all day on June 30th that the North Carolinians encounter. So it had to be a pretty rough night for Burgoyne's men down along Marsh Creek as they go into battle the next day with very little rest and having been exposed to the elements all night long. The long and short of this is that the communications between Pettigrew and Hill and Heath are somewhat garbled. The report that, in fact, Pettigrew had reported during the course of the day, back to Harry Heath, that there was United States cavalry forces, and they were not militia, they were real Army of the Potomac troops coming into Gettysburg. Heath refused to believe it. He refused to believe it when Pettigrew and his staff had a conversation late in the afternoon of June 30th. A.P. Hill disbelieved Pettigrew's report. According to one account, James Archer was part of that conversation. He also discounted Pettigrew's report. It's due to the fact that Pettigrew was not particularly experienced at this point. He had not been with Lee's army, and the ways that this conversation unfolded had serious consequences for Robert E. Lee's army on July 1st as another reconnaissance force is pushed forward.
Rob, can you move the camera?
Yep.
Because I want to talk about Buford. And we thank Rob Williams, Director of Outreach, here behind the camera, holding up his hands stoically to try to block the wind from the microphone. We're trying to get our handle on the windish situation. And can you see behind me?
Oh yeah. Yep. You're in good spot.
So Darrell talked a little bit about what Buford's men are doing and how they make their way to Gettysburg. What happens to them on the early morning hours of June 30th, 1863, as they're trying to link back up with John Reynolds' left wing of the army. Now let's talk a little bit about where the different elements of the Army of the Potomac are, especially the ones that are going to be important here on July 1st. The Army of the Potomac has started crossing its namesake river around the 25th of June, and the First Corps has gone on a pretty hellish march from the Potomac River up to Middletown, Maryland, and then back towards Frederick, and then up towards Emmitsburg, covering a lot of ground. They're in the front of the army as they're coming up, and Buford's men have been sticking with them for a lot of that. And then on the morning of June 29th, two of Buford's brigades under William Gamble and Thomas Devon are going to cross over Turner's Gap, the South Mountain Range, that major mountain range that stretches from the Potomac River all the way up to the outskirts of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and really is instrumental in screening Union and screening the Confederate movements from the United States Army as both armies are moving up into Pennsylvania. Well, Buford's men are going to cross over at Turner's Gap, and they're going to ride about 50 miles on June 29th, coming all the way up on the west side of those mountains, and they're going to camp near the little community of Fountaindale, not far from Fairfield, Pennsylvania, on the evening of June 29th into June 30th. On June 30th, they're going to try to reconnect, as we said, with Reynolds' men coming up through the area of Fairfield, and it's in Fairfield that they are going to run into those Confederate troops. And Buford says that instead of trying to engage them, he doesn't want to disturb the plans of the commanding general, and so he disengages his men and is going to come around south, swing through Emmitsburg, Maryland, and then meet up with Reynolds. And if you can look out to the west, we're looking towards Fairfield, looking towards Jack's Mountain, which is not too far, approximately where Buford's men are going to smash into this element of the Confederate Army, and it's going to really tip Buford off to something really big Army are trying to keep him away from. And this is going to become important because this is going to heavily influence the steps that John Reynolds is going to take that evening. So Buford's men ride down towards Emmitsburg, Maryland, and if you can see, the weather vane on top of the seminary library is pointing almost directly at a mountain that comes down and meets the horizon down there at Emmitsburg, Maryland. That's where Reynolds' men had camped on the night of June 29th. Oliver Howard's 11th Corps has moved up to take the position of the 1st Corps, and the 1st Corps has moved up the Emmitsburg Road towards Gettysburg, but they're encamped about 4.5 miles out of town. The 1st Division of the 1st Corps along the banks of Marsh Creek on the Emmitsburg Road south of Gettysburg. John Reynolds has established his headquarters at Moritz Tavern. We posted a video a little bit earlier about Moritz Tavern, what's going on there on the night of June 30th. But Reynolds seems to be pretty concerned about what's going on in his front, and really he has every right to be, because he is coming up into the jaws of the Confederate Army. By this time, Jubal Early's division has come back, made their way back from York. Robert Rhodes' division is coming down towards from the Carlisle area, from the north. You have a big element of the Confederate Army out towards Cashtown. So Reynolds is approaching this area, and he has 3 elements of the Confederate Army that have the potential to close in on him. So Buford meets up with Reynolds somewhere around Moritz Tavern on the late morning of June 30th. He's going to give his report. Buford is going to come up to Gettysburg. Reynolds is really concerned that evening especially about his left flank being turned from the direction of Fairfield. This report that Buford has given him seems to have really concerned him that some big threat is going to come from the west. And to counter this supposed threat, he has his entire 3rd Division of the 1st Corps camped about a mile west of Moritz Tavern, at the area where Pumping Station Road and Bullfrog Road meet, an area called White's Crossroads. And this is to keep an eye on any threat that might come from the direction of Fairfield. He also has 4 companies of the 19th Indiana of the famous Iron Brigade camp, we believe, covering the area around Sachs Bridge, which is a major thoroughfare between Gettysburg and Fairfield, coming on the Millerstown or Pumping Station Road. Sometime in the evening, about dinner time, Oliver Howard is going to come up to Moritz Tavern. He's going to confer with Reynolds. They're going to talk that evening about what might happen the next day, what role their wing is going to play. And then Oliver Howard is going to go back to his headquarters down at St. Joseph's College, down around the Emmitsburg area. So Buford and his men have come up into Gettysburg. Buford has seen the threat from the west, and he recognizes also that there is a potential threat coming from the north. And he has Tom Devon's brigade cover the approaches from the north end of town. Even that evening, he's talking about roving gangs of cavalry on the roads north of Gettysburg. And as the day is going on, even as Buford is setting up his vedette line north, west, and east of town, they're gathering information, and it shows how well prepared the Army of the Potomac is on the evening of June 30th. The last dispatches that Buford sends to Reynolds and George Meade give a very, very accurate picture of what's going on around Gettysburg on that evening. About 10:15, Buford is going to send his last report, where he's going to say that Hill's Corps is massed around Cashtown. He believes Longstreet's Corps is behind Hill. Rhodes is to the north. Early is to the east. And so all of this information has been fed back to Reynolds and on to Meade. So as Reynolds is coming up into Gettysburg on the morning of July 1st, and I like to think about the Iron Brigade going across the open field here between the Seminary and McPherson Ridge, and if you're down on the ground, you can see you can't see over the top of McPherson Ridge, but due to the great intelligence that Buford has captured on the evening of June 30th, the Iron Brigade knows what they are going to see as they crest that ridge. Archer's Brigade doesn't. And I think it's a very telling story about the different approaches to what's going on. Darrell has talked a lot about, you know, just kind of this not really sure what's going on, discounting reports. They have the right man up here at Gettysburg. They believe what Buford is saying to Reynolds, what Buford is saying to Meade, and by this time George Meade has been in command of the Army for 2 days, but he has ordered his army to draw 60 rounds of ammunition and prepare 3 days' ration, which everybody knows is a sure sign that a battle is imminent. They're not drawing new clothes and the kind of the humdrum trappings of Army life. But one of the things that I like to think about, you know, the fields down here, and I don't know, Rob, if you can move the camera a little bit, looking down at the swale between the Seminary Ridge and McPherson Ridge, and that's where part of the 8th Illinois Cavalry is going to camp on that night of June 30th. I like to talk about how the seminary grounds, the area around where we're standing, is the area of the battlefield that is occupied for the longest period of time by one or the other army. From the afternoon of June 30th, when Buford's men first come up here, all the way through the morning of July 5th, when the last elements of the Confederate Army of Early's division retreat down the Fairfield Road. But this was an area of intense action on the evening of June 30th. Buford, he starts having his headquarters down at the Eagle Hotel down in the center of town, but he's moved up here on the evening of June 30th to keep an eye on what's going on. He's meeting with his 2 able brigade commanders, Tom Devon, William Gamble, to talk about what the actions are going to be the next day. He sent Aaron Jerome, and we're going to talk a lot about Aaron Jerome tomorrow morning. Aaron Jerome, the signal officer, has been sent up here to this prominent point, and that's a word that they use, to keep an eye on the campfires burning off to the west. And he says in the morning, Buford says to Jerome, in the morning, keep an eye out for dust. So Buford is very hands-on that evening, and definitely making preparations for what he's going to see the next morning. So,
that contrast in reconnaissance, that contrast in the information that's flowing to the headquarters of both of the forces that are near Gettysburg on June 30th couldn't be more dramatically different. And one historian, Earl Hess, argues, and I think pretty convincingly, that Pettigrew was really the wrong person to be leading that reconnaissance. Even though he was the senior brigade commander by service date, he did not have the kind of experience that the other brigade commanders in Heath's division had, and it had developed over the course of the year prior during Lee's very successful campaigns in Virginia and Maryland. Well, less so in Maryland, but it's still been a fighting force that had been in close contact with the United States Army of the Potomac for over a year. And Pettigrew is new to that level of intensity. He needed to bring back more information, and the fact that he turns and leaves before he really, he says it's Army of the Potomac Cavalry, but he doesn't bring back any specific information about regimental designations, about not even which brigade, and there's no evidence that these officers back in Cashtown can gather from Pettigrew that would demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was really the Army of the Potomac that they were looking at. There are a lot of advantages that the United States Army has during the Gettysburg campaign. This flow of information is absolutely critical. The performance of Buford's cavalry troops, the citizens in the Cumberland Valley, reporting to Darius Couch the situation. Thank you. As a Southerner, that's not how that's pronounced, but I'm told in Pennsylvania that's how you say it. I'm still practicing DeSaussage's name for Tuesday, or for July 2nd from the 15th South Carolina, so I might get the Huguenot names right. In any case, the flow of information really gives Meade a huge advantage. The fact that Buford knows where every troop on at least on this side of the mountain is absolutely.
It was a pretty good
vital.
idea at that side.
Yeah, I'm talking about all. Roads,
Johnson,
Rhodes and Heath. At least he knows exactly where they are. He knows where Early is, and none of those guys really know where anybody is. Robert E. Lee has
not only that, they don't know what to do. They don't know where they're going.
They don't. You've got the conversation between Early and
Heidelberg. We have a video on that.
Coming out, and it's kind of bumfuzzling for these guys. They don't quite know what's going on. Richard Ewell is absolutely confused about this time on June 30th as to what Robert E. Lee really wants him to do.
And you're third in command to be confused.
Right, and evidently the man who had kind of developed the tactical plan for the early phases of the campaign from the Battle of Winchester until July 1st. Really, it seems that Early is the man who is pushing the envelope on the invasion. So in any case, there's a lot of information that Meade gets. That John Reynolds gets, that Robert E. Lee is not getting. And remember that Robert E. Lee has just crossed the river. He's only in Pennsylvania for a couple of days, and he's kind of trailing behind the entire army. One of the last guys across the river, and he's in the headquarters all the way over in Chambersburg. And so he's kind of out of touch. He rides across the mountain the next morning. But on June 30th, it's A.P. Hill, it's Harry Heath, it's Johnston Pettigrew, and James Archer really kind of setting the tone for what's going to happen by discounting this information. And again, Pettigrew really fails in aggressively pushing and probing and finding out who these guys really are. And that's a significant failure on the part of Pettigrew on June 30th. It's frightening to imagine what would have happened had James Archer been the senior brigadier that day, or in that brigade, and how he would have conducted that reconnaissance. So, the whole issue of command and control. I mean, think about this. Most of Hill's men, or at least Hill's headquarters, is still thinking that they're on the way to York. That they're pushing through Gettysburg, and they're going to continue on down the road. So. It's truly amazing to think about how little Robert E. Lee and his senior commanders knew of the situation in front of them on June 30th, and then you contrast that to John Reynolds, O.O. Howard, and John Buford, among others. Probably Dan Sickles, because he's brought over to guard the. He's brought over to guard the road, and then he's ordered to come up very quickly. Yeah. So there's a tremendous amount of information and good reads of the information.
And there are plans, and then there are contingencies that Meade is putting into place. One of the things that we haven't really talked about is the Pipe Creek Circular, but Meade is giving a lot of leeway to Reynolds to act as he sees fit on the 30th. Even so much as saying at one point, Meade says to Reynolds, if you feel that you want to fall back to Emmitsburg, if that is a better place to make a stand, you can do that. And then of course there's this Pipe Creek Circular, which is going to fall back to Pipe Creek in Maryland and form a defensive line for a Fredericksburg in reverse scenario. That it's pretty accepted that Reynolds and Howard never get this. But Meade has a lot of, and there's some people that maybe think that that's sort of Meade's sort of reticence about fighting a battle, but I think that it's more about, you're going to act, and we're going to act as we see, as the circumstances dictate. That there can be, it's not, that this is what we're going to do, and so on. So, that's all going on in Meade's headquarters on the night before the battle. That he's coming up with these different plans to pursue fighting as he sees fit, with the prime directive, of course, being to keep the Army of the Potomac between Lee and Washington, D.C. Baltimore.
Yeah, there's several avenues that Meade can take, and it doesn't seem that Lee has quite coalesced what he wants his next step to be. He's been caught off guard by the appearance of the United States Army across the Potomac River, and he's having to make some pretty fast decisions on June 29th and June 30th as his campaign is coming to a head. A campaign that he'd been planning at least since the beginning of 1863 and quite possibly since the fall of 1862, thinking about another invasion of the North after the Sharpsburg campaign is over. So again, I think that the big important takeaway from June 30th is how well informed the United States Army was and how poorly informed the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia was as they began to move towards the fighting on July 1st.
So I think that finish up a little by just talking about what, if you were standing up here on the evening of June 30th in 1863, what are you seeing? And there's two quotes that I want to read because I think that they for me have always illustrated the importance of this spot and some of the dread that the townspeople must have been feeling on that evening. And I know I understand that part of my townspeople quotes got drowned out earlier, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But Michael Jacobs, who is a professor at Pennsylvania College, now of course Gettysburg College. Michael Jacobs is the person, if you ever want to know what the weather was like for almost any day for a 25-year period in the mid-1800s, Michael Jacobs keeps the weather book, so we know exactly what the weather was during the battle. But Michael Jacobs comes up here to the cupola on the evening of June 30th with a telescope, and he says, "I took the telescope to the Lutheran Theological Seminary on Seminary Hill, west of the town, and went up to the observatory, where the whole horizon could be brought into view. I began a careful examination of the mountains to the west, where the Blue Ridge describes a semicircle. Wherever the mountainsides held clearings, smoke curled upwards. About the fires I could see the men walking, attending to camp chores, cooking, all the activities of an army held on a leash. They showed as clearly as though they were not a couple of 100 yards away. And below me, within easy eye-shot, were both of Buford's Federal brigades. The tide of war for the hour was halted under my very eyes." Second quote is from Lydia Ziegler, who's 12 years old, lives here in the seminary building with her family. Her father and mother are the caretakers of the seminary. And Lydia comes up, too, and says, "And vividly, too, did I remember that night of June 30th, when I stood in the seminary cupola and saw, as in panoramic view, the campfires of the enemy all along the blue mountainside only 8 miles distant, while below us we beheld our little town entirely surrounded by thousands of campfires of the Union Army. Many of the soldiers were engaged in letter writing, perhaps writing the last loving missives their hands would ever pen to dear ones at home. In the near distances we could see a large circle of men engaged in prayer, and as the breezes, and it's breezy now, came our way, we could hear the petitions which ascended to the Father in heaven for his protecting care on the morrow. However, many of the boys seemed utterly oblivious to the dangers threatening them, and were singing with hearty goodwill the Star-Spangled Banner and many of the other patriotic songs which we loved to hear." So that is June 30th, 1863, in the cupola. All day tomorrow we're going to be doing special videos from here on the seminary grounds. We're going to be back up in the cupola tomorrow morning talking about Buford and Jerome on that first day of battle. We'll be down talking about the final attack here on the seminary grounds. We'll talk about the Confederate Nerve Center in the afternoon. We thank you for joining us. Any final thoughts?
No, I think we've had a great time up here today.
We will be open tomorrow. If you're in Gettysburg, the museum will be open tomorrow from 9 to 5, also on Thursday, and then through the weekend. So if you want to come up, and see this great view for yourself, you can certainly do that. But we thank you for joining us for our Tuesday Facebook Live special edition from the cupola of Seminary Ridge Museum. Like this, please. Share it with your friends. I'm Pete Mealy, Executive Director, along with President Dr. Darrell Black. Rob Williams, our fearless and smiling Director of Outreach behind the camera. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Y'all take care.